All right, hello everybody. Welcome to This Is How We SHMeW It. This is going to be a class in body mechanics, in healthy movement patterns. It's a system that I came up with for making sure these things are all good. It's going to be mostly geared towards two-handed weapons, although I will be using a little bit of messer in this as well, and see that with a couple of tweaks, it does work for one-handed weapons as well. So, SHMeW is an acronym. It stands for shoulders, hips, meridian, wrists. It's meant as a sort of checklist that you can go down to kind of check form, make sure your joints aren't doing anything weird, and help avoid injury, help move a little bit more efficiently in your fencing. The really basic overview of it is S is for shoulders, and the question there is: Are your shoulders down and back? I use the term scapular engagement for it, and that just means all of the things that keep your shoulder blades in place are those turned on and working. The second point is hips, and that's are your hips open? Are they doing the things that they're supposed to be doing so that you can move well in whatever direction it is that you need to move in? And this is also going to have an effect on your knees and your ankles and keeping those joints safe as well. The third point in this is meridian. That is your center line. And particularly with two-handed weapons, it's the question of whether or not your hands are kind of centered, where the space between your hands is in line with this center line of the body. And the last point, wrists, is the question of, are your wrists straight? You want to make sure you don't have any excessive flexion or extension or deviation in either direction, because doing that is a potential source of injury and also just a general inefficiency with the sword. So we'll get to our first point, S for shoulders. And I'll give you a little bit of background regarding what we're talking about here. This is a scapula. This is your shoulder blade. It lives right here on your body. Your arm sits, your humerus sits in this little shallow dish. It is not a nice deep socket like the hip socket is. It's just this little shallow dish. The only thing keeping your arm connected to this is a bunch of muscles, a bunch of fascia. Otherwise, really shallow dish on some people, such as myself. Like that joint actually kind of moves around. It's really deep. From there, this little guy right here attaches to the collarbone, which then attaches to the breastbone, therefore making this the only part of your skeleton that your arm actually connects to. The remainder of that is entirely dependent on the musculature that surrounds it. So keeping those muscles healthy and working as they ought to is the way that we make sure that our shoulders are safe. Rotator cuff injuries are extremely common in HEMA. I've had them. I think right off the bat, I can think of at least 3 or 4 people in this chat who I know for a fact have had rotator cuff injuries, and a lot of this comes from just from certain bad habits that can pop up when using the sword. Right. So, what are some of these habits? A couple of things that tend to pop up are things like kind of overreaching or shrugging with the shoulders, See that as you get over here, this shoulder's kind of going up. And a lot of this comes from inappropriate internal rotation in some places, but the place where it really comes in is a lack of engagement, mostly from the serratus anterior. Serratus anterior is a people like to call it the boxer's muscle. It's that kind of like sawtooth muscle that you see here. They're really prominent on boxers. The goal of serratus anterior and the function of serratus anterior rather, is to take your scapula and keep it nice and close to the rib cage. When the scapula stays nice and close to the rib cage, a lot of the weight that you might have on the arm kind of it gets just redistributed. It gets distributed throughout the body a lot better. If I take my sword and hold it out at extension, and I let my so right here, I'm not engaging any of that. I'm just holding the sword out. You see, this shoulder is shrugging up a little bit, and my shoulder blade is kind of poking out. Now, if I take these muscles and I use those, I like to think of it as like I hook a rope onto my shoulder blade, and I just kind of pull it forward. And now, whereas here, I felt all the weight of the sword right here. I felt it in these tiny little rotator cuff muscles. Here, however, I feel the weight of the sword down my entire back. I feel it throughout my posterior chain. And so you may have noticed another thing that happened with that was that when I pulled that in, it straightened my thorax. Straightening the thorax is important in what we do. We don't want to be all kind of collapsed like this. We want to have this nice straight posture. The hip hinge is a thing that is a motion that we use a lot of. And I realize I should probably talk about the hip hinge a little bit for anybody who doesn't know. The hip hinging is moving just at the hips. It's keeping the spine totally neutral, and using the hips as the hinge. A way that you can test this or train this is if you got some kind of stick. All right, put it back here, and you'll have 3 points of contact. You'll have your tailbone, mid-back, and the back of your head. And set your feet to a comfortable width. And start trying to just move at the hips. You'll feel a pull in your hamstrings as you do this, at the back of your leg. And you'll get to a certain point at which your hamstrings just don't want to go anymore, and then maybe you bend your knees. The point of having the stick here is to make sure that the spine is remaining neutral. If I round my upper back, I lose contact down here. If I arch my back, I lose contact in the middle. And of course, if my head goes some strange direction, I lose contact at the head. So if we don't have the shoulders pulled back, then we can't hinge the hips, and we lose this nice strong position in favor of a position kind of like this. Another place where this comes in is, as you see it a lot, you see this a lot with people who are just starting out, where they'll go to get a cut and end up hitting the floor. Pull all of that back, and you stop hitting the floor. Even with a much longer weapon, I can do this with upper back grounded. I hit the floor. And now that's not happening because all of that is pulled in and all of that is stable. So it's a slightly closer view of what we're looking for in the shoulders. Are they, the common cue for that is down, back, and there we have that nice neutral spot. So now that we've looked at that a little bit closer, we can move on to the hips. And the little heuristic that we will use for that is, are your hips open? Move the camera down a little bit, yeah. So are your hips open? Now the difference between open hips and closed hips is in internal versus external rotation. If I pick up my foot like this, and I move it in from up here, then I'm rotated internally. If I go the other way, then I'm rotated externally. What this ends up looking like on the ground is the difference between a position like this and a position like this. So we can go into a small exercise that I use to familiarize people with this difference between internal and external rotation. So we're going to first point our toes in. The toes are going to be pointed in, again, from the hip. You should be feeling this right here, just on the outside of the hip joint. That's where you should feel the tension. That's the muscle that's working here. And then come up onto the toes, and then come out with it. This you should be feeling kind of upper part of the glutes is where you should be feeling this. External, and then toes, internal. And you can switch back and forth between these. And then from a neutral position, you can, again, get up onto your toes a little bit. And take your heels and make them go that way. And take your heels, make them go the other way. Now take your toes, make them go this way. And then your heels, make them go that way. And now you're doing the breakfast club dance. Getting familiar with internal and external rotation of the hips is going to be important for fencing. Another exercise we have for this is penguin walks. So internal on both sides. Remember, as you're doing this, take a look down your leg. Make sure that your femur is pointing in the same direction as your toes. What you don't want to be doing with this is having your hips still kind of pointed this way, but just pointing your toes in. That's no good. Any situation like that is a potential knee injury that is closer than you think. So when you're doing this stuff, make sure that stuff's coming from the hips. You can sink your weight into it a little bit, but rotate internally here and just kind of walk like that. This looks really stupid. Nobody looks cool doing this. It is impossible to look cool while doing this. But you're going to feel that back in here from this locomotion, and that is going to help familiarize you with this internal rotation. Penguin walk number 2, same thing, but your hips are pointed out. And here, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to feel that working back in here. Go backwards, go forwards. The point is that you're walking while your hips are totally externally rotated. So what does this end up looking, with these things in mind, what does what does hips open end up looking like when we're fencing? Well, if we take if we think about our standard neutral stance, then I'm going to pick a point. I'm going to pick I'm going to pick the camera as my point of focus. And I'm going to turn myself about 45 degrees to that. I'm going to get my feet to a comfortable width. I typically use feet a little wider than your hips. So if you can find your hip joint, and just look down and see that your feet are just kind of just to the outside of that. And then come up onto your toes. And now turn your hips to face whatever your focus was. And adjust that to something that's comfortable. My toes in this case, I've got maybe like say this side of my kneecap is probably the thing that's most directly in line with that target. I'm keeping the hips open, which is ultimately going to help me move. Hips closed in this case would be something like this. This is something that you probably see a little bit more in traditional martial arts, but it ends up kind of hindering us with the longsword just because of how much lateral motion we need to is required of us when using the longsword, particularly things that will ultimately require us to move our hips in this wide angle. Having the toes pointed in and the hips kind of closed in this case is a common issue that can be solved by once again having the hips open and moving along those lines. Keeping the hips open is also a thing that is going to help with the knee health, because I can get over here where I use the cue of keep your toes pointed at your target. My toes pointed at my target, but my knee is lagging behind. Why is my knee lagging behind? Because this isn't doing its job. I get that going, and then the knee kind of comes out to where it needs to be. So shoulders, are your shoulder blades engaged? Hips, are they open? And open isn't a hard and fast thing. You will have moments where your hips do need to be closed in order to move. Like the process of moving forward involves, there's internal rotation that happens right in the middle of it. But in most of your movements, in most of your static positions, the hips are going to want to be open. And we'll come back around to all of this as we kind of tie everything together. Next point is meridian. Keeping your center line in mind. With a longsword, this means making sure that the space between your hands is in line with this, or that this center line is falling somewhere within the space between your hands. And again, this totally applies to all two-handed weapons. The biggest difference between something like this and a greatsword or a poleaxe is that in the latter case, I have more space between my hands, and therefore my angles are going to change a little bit. But overall, everything still applies. So what does this end up looking like for longsword? Well, it can be case for reasons that, like, like we don't hold flug on this side. This feels bad, but this feels pretty good. Same thing for ox. We don't hold ox on this side. We hold it on this side. If I switch my hips, then I don't hold ox. Then I'm not really holding ox on this side anymore. I'm holding it on this side. Same for flug. I'm not. This feels weird and strange, and I kind of want to get out of this position as soon as possible. So I go here instead. What this really comes down to is well, no, that's before I get there. So okay, so where are some places in our fencing where we might end up kind of deviating from that? Well, there's if I use it's how to attack something that's directly in front of me. Example, I might end up in a position like this, and that can work probably, but it feels very odd. If I drop my hands and you see that my hands end up over here. Well, okay. So how can I shift my meridian to put it where it would be in line with my hands with a little turn of the hips? But the sword still wants to end up over here. So rather than stepping straight forward and ending up kind of over here, what if I then step out to the side, and then, hey, what do you know, there I am, and then the more this trails behind me, the more rotation I get out of the sword. And then I'm in a nice secure place where I can, I don't know, do whatever it is that I need to do. Another scenario. Cutting through and ending up over here. Well, sure, that's all right, but that feels a lot nicer. Keeping that space in line with my center. So even some of the sort of like the more itemized positions that we see in some of the later sources start to kind of fall into context a little better, where we can look at this as ox, right? In this position, I've got everything nice and lined up. But in here, my weight is totally shifted forward. But what if I start shifting my weight back? And I end up kind of all the way back here. Well, then the only difference between the first position and this one is which way my hips are pointing and where my weight is at. Because if I then shift my weight back this way, then I'm here again. They both end up working because they both end up working, and we can find a good solid movement pattern between these two because I'm keeping my hands centered. So the question of where does the body need to go ends up being answered by, well, where does the sword need to go? If the sword needs to attack something over there, and it needs to do so by going straight down, then I end up with this. If I need to attack something that's directly in front of me, and the sword's got to go straight down, then maybe I take that step out to the side. Maybe I even I even do the same thing, but my hips just turn. Big difference between that and this. Sword's ending up in the same place in both cases, but in the latter case, I haven't moved my hips to get there. In the former case, I have. Second one ends up feeling like a safer and more stable position, and it gives you more options, more things to work from. You're more balanced when you get into that position. That's two-handed weapons. Where do one-handed weapons factor into this? Well, if I take the sword, well, let's take a look at some of our ranges of motion. If I have a one-handed weapon, then I can just step all the way up and down this line here. And I can comfortably do stuff up and down this line here. I've got about 90 degrees. I got about 90 degrees in this section of this kind of bubble that I have to play with. So one of the nice things about having a weapon in one hand is that if I want to make a diagonal cut, I don't have to move my hips to get there. I can give a cut this way, and this way, and this way, and this way, and it certainly helps to shift the hips to get it, because that'll give me a starting point that's out here rather than over here. But it doesn't have the same crucial element to it that the longsword does. With the case of the longsword, if I want to make the difference between a vertical cut and a diagonal cut is the movement of the hips. So the meridian still comes into play with a one-handed weapon. You just have the area of focus just shifts a little bit. If I want to give a nice big diagonal cut, I'm still kind of wanting to start over here and power through. That movement is almost exactly what I would tell Hoover showing, and I forget which drawing it is, but he's got the hips up here and he's got them primed. And another point here, you see the shoulder is down and back. If I let that shoulder come up and kind of shrug while I'm doing this, then I lose most of the strength that I had going into that. So meridian, in the case of longsword or two-handed weapons, is the space between your hands in line with your center. If not, what do you need to do to get your center in line with your hands? This brings us to the last letter in SHMeW, which is the wrists. And that is just, are your wrists straight? That means if I want to point the sword directly out in front of me, then my wrists are going to stay straight. And as long as I've got this grip on the sword, I'm always going to have a little bit of an angle here, which ends up working, which really at the end of the day works out well. If I'm giving a cut, I want to make sure that my wrist structure isn't collapsing, and that I'm not getting something like this. And to that end, we can talk a little bit about what stabilizes the hand via the muscles in the forearm. So the human body is a pile of bones that's strung together with with funky cables that can tighten at different rates and at different tensions. And if they all kind of work together as one, they can take a thing like your hand, which is a bunch of sticks that sits on a pile of rocks that sits on another pair of sticks, and make it a really stable thing. And we do this by tightening all of the muscles around the forearm. Now, of course, from there, of course, it stands to reason that different muscles control different parts of the forearm and will stabilize the hand in different directions. If I take my hand and I tense these two fingers, I'll find that I have loads of stability in this direction, in the flexion and extension, but almost no stability along our ulnar and radial deviation. On the other hand, or on the same hand, if I tighten these two fingers, then I have all the stability in the world along this plane, but I have almost none this way. All fingers together, and that hand is stable in all directions. So of course, with swords, we're usually instructed to squeeze with these bottom fingers when cutting, and that's great. That's good. That's the thing that keeps us stable here. When we lose that tension, that's where we end up with that kind of broken wrist at the end of the cut. The question that we need to be asking ourselves regarding the wrists is what is my goal? What am I trying to accomplish with the sword? And what do I need to do with my hands in order to make that the case? If I want to hold plain old longboard, then this is what I want for that. If I'm in the middle of a cut of a free overhell, then that's what I want there. If I then wind to ox on my left side, we end up over here, right in that position that a lot of beginners kind of find themselves in which they end up over here because they're not allowing the sword to rotate in their hand over here. Sorry, they're not they are not allowing the sword to rotate in that bottom hand and let that kind of just go up to wherever it needs to be, whether that is on the grip or it's on the pommel or whatever. Same deal on the other side. That's usually a little less so. If anything, you end up with a little bit of a kink in the top hand. But I'm over here in the left ox. Is my wrist straight? No. What do I need to do to get it there? Well, maybe I need to. Hey, what do you know? The thing I need to do to get it there is pull that shoulder down and back. And that ends up putting me in this much stronger position. If I do want the sword to go straight out in front of me, well, this grip isn't working. What? How do I straighten my wrist here? Right. Okay. So I've got shoulder blades down and back. How do I get these wrists straight? Let's see. Well, I just straighten them out, then I end up here. That's not what I'm trying to accomplish. But if I then bring them underneath and I get into what I call the hot dog grip. Hot dog grip because you're saying, here, have a hot dog. Then all of a sudden I can keep this perfectly straight line. My wrists are nice and straight. And this is a good position to be in. If I don't need this straight line, then I can be here. Likewise, everybody's favorite, SHMeW. Right, I'm trying to get over there to cut the top of the head. Now, if I try and reach way over, and I end up with these bent wrists. Well, what if I just straighten those wrists? And then I get right here. This ends up, and this tracks with the Kirchner's SHMeW, or whatever the hell he calls it. Odds are the Kirchner knows that this is no good. This is great. My wrist is nice and straight here. So making little, constantly asking yourself, what does my body need to do in order to accomplish the thing that I want, is kind of the goal of SHMeW, or at least this gives you kind of a checklist that you can go down if you're watching a recording of yourself, or if you're just kind of trying to figure out some movement. So are my shoulders, are my shoulder blades engaged? Are my hips open? Are my hands centered? Or again, with Messer, am I within this acceptable range? And are my wrists straight? So let's see, since having gone through this, oh wow, it's 7:43 already. All right, so having gotten through this, I'm gonna drink some water. I'll take a couple of questions, and then I think after that, I'll provide some postures or movement things, and have you folks kind of derp, right? Come up with some corrections to that, or ways that I could change my posture to be in a more efficient position. So I'm drink some water, and I will take some questions. Is that in the chat?
Or if anyone wants to raise their hand, we can call on them. Ashanti.
Hi, I have an observation that I wanted to maybe add to this, and I don't know if now is the best time for that, but tell me if it is.
Go for it.
So one of the things I noticed is in the elbow positioning as a concept, I'm making my video big so I can see me, is that sawtooth muscle that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's more engaged the higher up your left arm is. So,
hang on, I'm trying to, wait, let me just unpin myself so I can pull you up.
Say again?
He can't see you.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, all right, yeah, I got you.
So that sawtooth muscle gets more engaged the higher my left arm gets. So if I try to cut from here, I'm still using a lot of my elbow muscle in the back of my tricep, which I think doesn't work very well. I find as soon as I bring my left arm, my left thumb up to my right ear, I feel tension running along the entire back, and I'm starting my cut with that sawtooth muscle. So if I start my cut with my right foot forward like that, I have all this tension in the system that I can feel pulling through my core. Where if I do it with my left arm down, I feel like I'm almost entirely using my arm or my tricep to do that.
All right. Well, so in the second, so in the second case, like let's, you know what? Actually, let's yeah. So let's see. In that second case, so we, you know, where I'm starting high. Yeah, I totally feel this here, and once again, keeping everything totally centered. Yeah, all of that. That's great. If I start low. Yeah, and then especially because I got the tennis elbow right now, I can very much feel that. I would say probably that from this lower position because this is all still very much engaged down here. I would say that it's possibly even more important to make sure that the hips are moving and rotating because you're starting from a position that's a little bit lower. Like if I'm starting over here, and I'm just kind of getting a little thing from even giving a quick little cut from down there. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can feel that my hips end up having to pick up some of the slack. So yeah, that's legit. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that answered my question really well. Thank you.
Cool. Anybody else?
I think Julie had a question. Julie raised her hand.
Yeah. And Julie.
Yeah, it was just more of an observation than a question. Thank you, Dan, for putting all of that together. We for Athena, we run through something called the bracing sequence, which seemed to tie into some of the very early stuff you worked on, but I like how you expanded into really highlighting the other parts of the body rather than we basically build in a structure from kind of the tailbone up to the shoulders, but we don't really talk about arms as much. So I didn't know if you've heard of that technique before, with the arms and stuff. So that was cool for me to see that.
What did you call that?
We call it the bracing sequence. And I don't remember if that actually stands for anything useful, but I forget where. I didn't pull it up. One of our instructors found it, I think, from some CrossFit video, but it made sense and it's worked well for us. But it doesn't cover like arm placement or really knee placement. So I was watching what you're doing and kind of thinking of the bracing sequence and putting them together, and was curious if you had heard of that. And yeah.
I have not, but I'm gonna look into that.
Right. I'm gonna look it up. Remember, it's been so long since we've done it with fresh eyes, but
yeah, yeah, and let's see, we don't have a ton of time left, but so what I'm gonna get into after this is stuff that really shows how these things all connect to each other. Because yes, these are individual points, but you know, because it's your body and all these things have to work together. The fixing one thing often involves tweaking everything a little bit. And okay, Katie, can you demonstrate how you straighten your wrist to hold the sword parallel to the ground? Yeah, hot dog position. So this I can't claim credit for the name. This is all that was Adam Frandy's doing. And so the position is like if you got a hot dog in your hand and you're saying like, here, friend, have a hot dog. I have a hot dog for you. But you do that with a sword. And it's kind of like that. The thumb isn't really curled around the blade. And it allows you to get over here. And if I'm not given, and that's how I get into what Sasha refers to as that goddamn shill-how. That same thing ends up tweaking that angle a little bit, ends up turning into the nice into the way I do that, to that nice high Scheitler that just sort of comes up over the top and is then really easy to slice with the ground. yeah, hot dog grip is great, and it's also just a hilarious name for a grip. Let's see. Leanne says I should. I definitely experienced the wrist hyperextension after what I thought was a good strong cast out of the tip using the last 2 fingers tightening the grip. Hot dog prevents that. Yeah. Hot dogs. So I mean, so if you really want the sword to be in a straight line down your arm, yeah, totally. You'll having the thumb. The biggest difference really is the difference between that and this. Difference of whether or not your thumb is curled around the blade, kind of similar to the difference between this and the false grip or thumb grip that we would use for a short edge cut. It's kind of the same thing. The sword's just sitting in the hand a little bit differently. Hot dog extension turns into by corner. Yeah, kind of. Right. You take that position and bring it in close. Totally. Have we got any more questions? Any more questions at all? All right. So we can take a look at some positions, maybe common pitfalls that people have, and take a look at the way these things all interact with each other. So common thing, see a lot of this. A lot of people who keep that real low tog. Right foot stays forward, and they give a cut that comes out. Now here, I'm exaggerating all of this, but let's take a look at what's going on here. So if we run through our list, the first thing that we're noticing is shoulders, right? I see that rounding in my upper back. If I pull shoulders down and back, then I end up over here. So now that the sword's all up there, but it needs to be lower because it's supposed to be hitting something right now. Well, okay, so I'm going to lower the sword. All right, wait. Well, that's no good because now I'm all off balance. So let's see. I need to get my sword in line with my midline, which means I need to turn my hips to get there. So now the sword's in line with the midline, shoulders still kind of up, and I can't really totally get it down. So what am I going to do? I'm going to open my hips. And now with all of those things together, the wrists weren't an issue this time. The wrists kind of stayed straight. Although had I then kept the shoulders back, but tried to compensate for the sword now being up here by going there, now we have that bent wrist position, and we kind of go through all of that until we eventually find ourselves over here. Another common thing we get is like the shrugging of the shoulder with the cut. Where maybe I'm trying to hit something that's over here, or maybe I have actually stepped into it well, but the shoulders kind of come up. So in this case, the left shoulder's actually not doing too bad, but the right shoulder's got to come down. But once the right shoulder comes down, the sword gets into some kind of wacky place. But overall, everything's more or less lined up. Turning the cut from this, and you also see that before I fix that shoulder, the wrist has a little bit of a kink in it because I'm allowing that shoulder to come up. And this can happen. There's a couple of reasons this can happen. This can happen because of it can happen just from not paying attention to what's going on here. But another place where this comes up is trying to reach further than you can realistically. Another case, we'll do a case of where again we'll just do an overhaul, but I'm trying to fight this guy over here who's much taller than me, or perhaps I'm trying to fight this guy over here, this 7.5 foot tall monster. So I try to cut and I try to reach as far as I can, and in the process, I end up losing all of that because even should this connect, it won't be a particularly good strike. I pull it back, and and I'm in a more stable and more secure position for when Gigantor decides to just kind of barrel into me, because it's a hell of a lot easier for me to step out of the way from here than it is from here. Now I kind of have to recalibrate. There's a much bigger chance of him just kind of knocking me over. But if all of this stuff is tight, even if I can't reach as far, because I do end up getting a lot of reach by doing this. But then the question becomes, is it worth it to get all that extra reach out of this when just kind of taking your hips and moving the whole body a little bit further will accomplish the same goal? So there's a couple scenarios. We can, and all this plays into bigger swords as well. Like I said, I can give you a couple examples. The biggest mechanical difference between the great sword and long sword is just how far apart your hands are. If I got my hands over here with the great sword, all of this becomes magnified. I try to overextend with this shoulder, and you see how that wrist ends up bending. I've just got to accept that this is the angle this is gonna end up at. If I want to get lower, I gotta hinge. If I cut to here, that's where that cut's gonna get. If I want to come back, then no better way to bring very large sword back than to do it with my whole body, which ends up being something like this. And which then readies us for the next cut. Man, I love the ceilings in this place. So yeah, all of this also applies to great swords, polearms, and it's for very similar reasons that we see why something like spear fighting gets to be the way it is. I'm not winding left with the spear. That would entail me getting over here, and I just can't get the point forward, really. If I'm doing everything well, keeping everything down and back, that's all of that ends up staying on the one side. So does SHMeW apply to spheres? Absolutely. And it explains a little bit of why your sphere game is going to be really one-sided, and that if you want to be on the other side, you got to switch hands. One other point that I wanted to make is it has to do with, in the article that I wrote, I don't remember how I worked this in. I think I worked it in with the shoulder section, but the same principle of integrity that keeps your wrist, keeps your hand from bending when you make a fist, is the very same thing that keeps everything stable when you're in a shorter position with the long sword. If I've got a bar in front of me, how much time we got? Okay, cool. All right, the very same, and this, by the way, if you want to strengthen SA muscles a little bit, take your sword, bring it overhead, and bend it, making sure you're keeping this stuff down and back. Actually, would that be helpful to people? Learning some stuff, going over some stuff for strengthening serratus anterior. All right, cool. All right, cool. Yeah, so let's do a little bit of that. So we know that SA is responsible for taking the shoulder blade and keeping it close to the rib cage, and we know that it works by pulling the shoulder blade this way. So there's a couple of ways that we can make this work. We can do it with a, we can do this by keeping that engaged and kind of bending a bar. We can do it by bending a sword. We can do it with what is referred to as an SA press, where you can do this on, let's see the place you can do this. You can do it on the edge of a table. I'm going to use as a quote unquote table. Where let's say this is the edge of the table and I'm sitting on it. If I let my shoulder blades kind of pop up and then just push the table away from myself, you should feel that right about in here. It's a little different if it's kind of like doing a dip, but it's as if you get yourself to full extension on the dip and then just arms are straight, but you're moving the shoulder blades. That is the SA press. So if you imagine, I'm just kind of like hanging off the edge of the table. I can have my butt totally off the table, or I can have it on the table a little bit for a little bit of support. That's a scaling for that. You can also do this from a push-up position, where if I get into a push-up position and just in this case, my arms are remaining straight. Arms are dead straight, everything is in line, but what I'm doing is I'm moving my shoulder blade back and forth. And that like any other push-up exercise can scale to where I can do this from a wall, where I just, again, arms are staying straight. You are just taking the shoulder blade and moving it around. And those are all good ways of sharpening. Geez, strengthening your SA muscle. Otherwise, if you have access to a gym, any kind of like overhead cable, exercise, that is the thing that's going to target this as well. Would I recommend the swole bars I have? Yes. Yeah, flex bars are great. Let me take those out. So yeah, these are flex bars. They're a physical therapy tool. So yeah, there's TheraBand makes a set, and then there's another brand called Can Do. They come in different resistances. Yeah, in this case I have the softest one, which is this kind of tan color, and the stiffest one, which is this black one. And yeah, same deal. If I keep my arms straight, and the motion is coming from the shoulder. Again, making sure you feel it in this. It's, if you find where like your chest muscle would be, it's kind of right behind that. And I just bend that in half. And of course, as you go along, you can go to ones with more resistance. But yeah, that's also a good way of doing it. And these things just have plenty of other really good uses. They're good for grip and loads of other things. Yeah, those things are great. Totally unnecessary, but if you want to get some of those, they're just good things to have around. Okay. What are they called again? So the you know what? I'll just drop it in the chat. It's TheraBand. TheraBand makes them as a product named FlexBar, and Can Do makes them a product named Flexible Bar. TheraBand FlexBar and Can Do Flexible Bar. Yeah, those things are great. They're absolutely not necessary, but if you have them and you have a use for them, then they're really good to have around. Right. So the point that I was getting to before, though, what's it? Work on. Yeah. I mean, yeah, deadlifts overall are just a great way of building strength. For warm-ups beforehand, I'll actually. Short answer, yes. There's a number of those. We'll do. Sometimes we'll do the penguin walks, or just some hip work where you just kind of and shift back and forth, shift my weight, get a little bit further with each one, switch my feet, do the same thing. Yeah, I mean, deadlifts are of course always a good accessory movement. Probably though the single most useful one I've got is teacups. We take typically you would take some kind of here's a coffee cup. Typically it comes from tea servers, which is why it's called teacups. But you can take a cup or a plate or whatever you so choose. Here, I can use a bean bag that works well. And hold it out. Step one, come under the arm and then out. And then you got to end up in the same position you started in. So you go up over the head and end up back here. And it's it's easy to scale because if I need to, because if I can't quite do the movement, I can kind of lean into it. And so while I'm going through this, I'll get to like right here and go, oh, hang on, this is kind of tight. Let me just work through this. Get right, so I get there. And then, yeah, there we go. I can get all the way through. And the idea is that, and of course, then of course do the same thing in the opposite direction. The idea here is that important thing to make sure of is that you're not gripping the bag at all. You're not gripping the bag at all. You're not assisting, because if I'm not keeping things, whoop, then I drop the bag, and I know that I need to work on that part of my range of motion a little bit more. But yeah, if you got a thing that like hurts or that you really can't get through, you can like kind of lean your body a little bit to get through it, and then you're really good. You can do it with two hands at once, which means that you can't lean in any direction. Which I haven't tried to do that in a while. I don't think I can still do it. Yeah, teacups are great though. There's a few others. For the most part, teacups are really good for getting your shoulders warmed up and just kind of keeping connected with everything. Anything that goes with keeping your hips open and your heels light. Which that's the thing that you can just kind of work warm up cuts into that. It doesn't even have to be cuts. You can just kind of move. Those are all good ways of kind of getting yourself warmed up. Walking while in a hip hinge. Do that with one side forward or with the other side forward. Those are all good ways to go. Yeah, now there's loads of warm-up type stuff for the most part, as long as you're like, if your hips and your shoulders and your hands are all kind of good and warmed up, I can do some wrist rotations, rotations from the elbows and from the shoulders. Yeah, all that stuff's good. Does that help at all? All right. So we're a little. Can you do anything with the hammer? What do you mean?
Like if you don't have a sword, or they're like simple warm-up exercises you could give somebody who doesn't ever swung a sword before to get a sense of how to do that.
Oh yeah, totally. So really anything that you can put that you can have two hands on. I like to suggest a hammer's good. If you got a small claw hammer or ball bean or whatever, that's good. I like just wooden ladle because it's kind of oblong, and I can get a sense of, and I can get a sense of edge alignment. So sorry, a wooden spatula, right? And so I can go through all of this stuff, and I can go through this entire kind of SHMeW checklist without actually having to use a sword. I mean, yeah, sure. There's the feeling of the weight in your hand, but for just kind of moving around and keeping all that good, yeah. Wooden spatula, it's great for it. And then likewise, you can do it for one-handed stuff as well. Totally works for all of that. If you got a claw hammer or something like that, just practice drive. If somebody can just practice driving some nails That's really good. Skillet for a minute, so it's nice. Welcome, Becky. Very cool. So Dina, how are we doing with time? Because
I mean, if you have anything left, go ahead. No rush.
Okay. That more or less wraps up the things I had to present. Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. So there was the point with tensegrity that I wanted to use to illustrate. And again, I don't remember how I actually tied this in with the article. But you know, the bit with the bit having to do with deriving structure through tension within the structure itself, and that ends up being how we're able to have stable but short positions with longsword. And that is, and to that end, if I take my, you know what, I can use one of these because that'll illustrate it really well. If I take flex bar and I kind of, you know, I'll use the really light one. And I just kind of give gentle counter pressure as if I'm kind of trying to twist it. Then, of course, the big rubber churro likes to twist. The thing is, when you have the handle of the sword, that doesn't happen. So the energy from this just kind of stays in here. All that tension remains right where it's at, and from there, you're able to kind of actually keep this structure, even though it's bent, pretty damn strong, even though your arms aren't totally straight. This does not carry over to one-handed weapons. If I try to resist the same amount of force like this, I'm going to lose this structure. Right there, I gotta keep everything straight. Here I lose it. But if I do this with the long sword, I'm then able to. I'm then able to actually absorb a lot more force. I don't have anything to really demonstrate that with right now. Maybe I'll show it pulling a sled at some point or something like that. I don't know. But the idea there is that by keeping that kind of counter tension, is if I were trying to wring out my sword but leaving it right where it's at. Hey, Loki. This is what allows us to have good structure even in shorter positions. I think the reason that I included that in the article was just to kind of say that if you can't get totally full perfect extension on everything you do, that's totally fine because everybody's built a little bit different. And if that's the extent of the extension that you can get, that's not a problem. You're not actually lacking in structure at all. But the way that we get there is that, again, the shoulders need to be kind of your scapulae need to be engaged in order for this to happen. If this comes up, and I kind of lose that because that structure just disappears. Here, however, because all of that's turned on and activated, I can actually keep things really strong. Like if I were to put on my breastplate right now or something like that, I would be able to hold a strong position, even though it's a very short position. God, how did I segue? I don't remember how I segued into that in the article. But if anybody here hasn't read it, that's libertyswordclub.wordpress.com. Click on the curriculum blog tab. You'll see an article called "This is how we SHMeW it," and that's kind of the whole thing that I have written out for this. Put that in the chat. Cool. But yeah, that's about all that I've got. And yeah, thank you, everybody. This is really exciting. This is the first time I've been directly approached about doing a workshop, so I'm very excited for this.
Thank you so much, Dan. Does anyone have any additional questions or comments?
Oh, thank you, Katie. Loki has decided to grace us all with his presence.
Ashanti?
Yeah, I think I really appreciate the hand thing. I think that's how I keep structure when winding, because I've been practicing the winding with a shortened sword, where it tells you to put the pommel towards the ground when winding, when hanging.
Oh, okay.
Be hanging to wind in to hanging. And that, I think, is how I do that. And I did not think of it until I saw that.
Oh yeah, I've got a whole thing on that I'm sort of been playing with. It's a little bit outside of the scope of this, but yeah, I've got a whole thing where the basically the idea is that quick movements can be done not by adding tension in some place, but by taking tension away from another place. It's a little bit out of the scope of this, but yeah, that's definitely something that I'm playing with. Cool. Yeah, that's it for me. If anybody's got any more questions at all.
Thanks. Thank you, Dan. So everyone, just check out gmac.club for some upcoming classes. We have recorded this class. It'll be up on the GMAC website probably in early April.